or like we've been introducing a lot of people to Althea. They're actually a grantee where we have a project in with a big bank. Truist has been supporting some work that we're doing in the southeast part of the United States. We had a grant proposal launch, and these are networks like yours, Jared, that are profit. Some are profit, some are quasi-profit, nonprofit.
Yeah. I call my little thing a hobby ISP.
It's needed. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to start us going forward because some of the colleagues here on the line who are presenting are in Africa and the UK, and we want to make sure that they get the chance, and it's late where they are. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jane Coffin. I work for the Internet Society. I'm here in my personal capacity. However, I do spend a lot of time on network infrastructure issues and the intersection of technology, policy, and development. My co-chair, Leandro Navarro, is with the University in Spain, in Barcelona. I don't think he's on right now, but Leandro has been a great co-chair who's actually also part of a very large community network in Spain. They're a fiber, wireless, and Wi-Fi based network. So we took over Gaia from Arjuna, and we're happy to just continue the goodness of bringing different presentations here. There's an RFC that came out under Arjuna. We've been trying to think as to whether or not we want to continue to look at updating that RFC, and that could be part of the conversation toward the end. You all have the agenda, and I'm going to stop talking soon so that we can turn to that agenda and run down the presentations that we have today. So up first is Mary Jane Sule from Nigeria. And Mary Jane, we're going to turn it over to you now and have you present. And if you could do a quick intro of who you are and what you do, that would be lovely. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Mary Jane, we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Bravo.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. Well, I think it's different times in different places. I'll just say greetings then. My name is Mary Jane Sule. I'm a lecturer at the University of Jos in Nigeria, but currently I am doing a postdoc at the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy. And my research, I used to be a network administrator at the University of Jos before I moved to the academia strictly, but I'm at the Department of Computer Science, so it's still like a build-up on my foundation. So my research work here with ICTP as a postdoc is around academic and community networks in Nigeria, which I'm going to discuss in this presentation. And I am actually working with some other people in this area. I'm not working by myself. We have Marco Zenaro, who is my supervisor here in ICTP, and he's actually my link to Jane and Gaia and the rest. So, and he's been working with community networks for some time now. Then we have Clement Onimi, who is staff of ICTP and in the Information and Communication Technology section of ICTP, who is one of the collaborators too on this research work. We have Professor Blama, who is my HOD back at home at the University of Jos in the Department of Computer Science. There's also, when I continue with the presentation, you're going to see that there are some universities that I'm working with too. And so one of them is, one of the lecturers from Plateau State University is Reverend Father Andrew Dewang, who is collaborating with us on this project and who is also the director of the advancement unit at the Plateau State University. Then there's Joel Gugwim, who is a deputy director at the University of Jos, ICT Directorate. University of Jos. So these are like basically the introduction of the people involved in the project. And I'll go into my presentation now. My presentation is going to follow the following overview. I'll talk about the importance of the topic, why the topic, the project concept and the deployment, proof of concept, because there's a project concept, but we've also tried to do a proof of concept of that project concept to see if it will work and how it will work and what the issues might be when we are going to fully deploy. And at the end of it is the conclusion. So I start. Why is this topic actually important? According to UNESCO report in 2019, it gave the statistics of out of school children to be some millions, and 60% of those out of school children are coming from Nigeria. That's in the whole world. The out of school children in the whole world, 60% are coming from Nigeria. That's a big number. And so, and out of that 60 also, they're coming from one particular part of Nigeria. That's the northern part of Nigeria. And this, out of this same number again, 60% of this out of school children are girls, the northern Nigerian girls. It's not actually surprising, even though I'm a northern Nigerian girl, but I have not had to face the religious and cultural challenges that most northern Nigerian girls from core north face. So because of this not cultural and religious challenges, a lot of northern Nigerian girls don't go to school actually. And for those who go to school, there's a limit. You don't really get to the top of it. There's a limit to how much education you can get, because most times they believe that the girl child should go and take care of the home, you know, like what she's meant for is to take care of the home. So most parents from northern Nigeria don't really consider the girl child education. Some of us have been lucky. It's a different story for us, but majority of the core northern Nigerian girls are having challenges to go to school. And we know that for any development, any national development in any country or in the world at large, we have to invest in good quality education. Right now, there's the Global Education Summit going on in London, and they're talking about how the countries can give so much, a good chunk of their budget to education. A place like Nigeria, even if you give a good chunk of your budget to education, the infrastructure is not there to meet up with the demands of this out of school children or the youth. And what better way to be able to meet up this demand than to use innovative online solutions? Because then you don't have to have everybody in one place, go to school in one particular place. Once there are these innovative solutions online for education, then you're sure that it can reach even the remotest village without them having to come down to the center. Even the biggest state, for example, Plateau State, where the University of Jos is, where I'm a lecturer. It's the biggest university in the state, but it can only accommodate about 18,000 students put together, both undergraduates, diploma, postgraduates, and also the structures are not there, even if you give so much to education in your budget. You have to consider other means, other ways of getting this youth and girl child educated. The former CEO of Cisco, John Chambers, said, and I quote, he said, "Internet and education are great equalizers." So if you want to think of innovative online solutions, you have to start considering things about the internet too. These two go hand in hand somehow. They are equalizers, and they could also make the gap wider, the difference between the developing countries and the developed countries. It could also, the internet could make it wider or close the gap depending on how you use it. And so my project is considering using the internet to provide education to even to provide quality education, even to the schools that are already there and to the communities that are hosting these institutions. There's the town and gown meeting together, you know, so the idea is for these communities too to enjoy some benefits of having an institution in their community. There's so much to consider with internet and education, but my research is going to be limited to a particular scope. And I'm limiting this research to basically just provide quality online education to high school graduates. Just this research is not considering online education for maybe primary school students, secondary, just high school graduates, and for the out of school youth, you know, from a particular age, from like 18 years and above. And also, its focus also, it's to improve the community's educational and economic status. If you have these schools, if you have these institutions providing services for their communities, for the communities that are hosting them, and providing them also information that are tailored towards their community, then you are going to improve the status of that community. And the kiosks and the computer centers that might grow out of this project also would also provide some economic solution to the communities too. This project, this research also is trying to focus on providing customized basic math training for the girl child. I said at the beginning that there's the cultural and religious challenges that the girl child faces. Even if we're ready to push and provide education for these girls, we have to provide it in such a way that the community is not going to reject it. You know, we want it's supposed to be a win-win for both the community and the girls and the institutions too. So it's a customized application that will still teach them about mathematics, and we're thinking of expanding it, not just mathematics, but other courses, but also using these courses to teach them home economics, home management, recipes. So then the communities will accept it without really looking at it like this is not part of us. These communities are where most of you must have heard about the Boko Haram and the rest. Boko Haram means Western education is a sin, right? So these communities are in these places where the Boko Haram has strongholds. So you just want to show them that, okay, the education is not as bad as it's made to look. It's also a good thing. And they can use this to also learn how to manage their homes better. And looking at the scope now, how do we deploy this? How do we make it available to both the institutions and the communities? So this is a basic conceptual model for the project. Ideally, at the end of it, when everything is sorted and there's enough funding, we're supposed to have the institutions communicating with each other and at the same time providing services to these communities. So this project actually envisaged a stage where we have institutions that maybe, take for instance, University of Jos might be very good in computer science, but maybe University of Abuja is not as good as, or does not have the resources that University of Jos has got. So the idea is for these institutions to come as one academic network and share resources. So they can have lectures together. Their students can have lectures together, taught by the best lecturer from any of the institutions, but having the same class and then having access to the same lecturer to give them quality education, to make them be at par with their mates anywhere. These lecturers do not have to come from only Nigerian institutions. We are partnering with other institutions, or we hope to partner with other institutions to get these resources, to provide these resources to these institutions. So by the time this project is fully deployed, you have academic institutions coming together, sharing library resources, human resources together, and then their own students too are gaining from the best instructors or best lecturers. And these are the institutions here, as you can see, and they're going to share these resources over the cloud. Why we said cloud is because not every institution is going to be able to afford a very good data center that will accommodate all these resources. So one of the institutions, or like in our case, we're thinking of the Nigerian University Commission, can serve as a foundation to provide resources to these institutions. Like even during registration now that things are done online, they could get resources from this University Commission and share the resources during registration and have their students register online, have their students access materials online, but without them having to start thinking of how to get money to start building a data center. And there are communities around them, which are these boxes at the left here and then right here. They will enjoy these infrastructural resources too from the institutions, and these customized apps that will help the communities will be hosted on this institutional infrastructure, and the communities can then enjoy some of these facilities without having to think about managing it, because these communities, some of them don't have the technical know-how to do these things, so they can enjoy it from the institutions that they are hosting. And the Nigerian Communication Commission is thinking of is trying to build on using the TV white space to build on policy that will allow the usage of TV white space. So this project is going to leverage on that and use the TV white space so that they can even penetrate into the remotest areas that might not even have access to these facilities. With TV white space, they can reach the remotest areas as much as possible. So what are the resources, the services with all this deployment? What are the services that will be deployed? We're certain that the remedial sciences, the remedial studies that are run by these institutions will be run online and to be run on this academic network to provide access to these communities. Some communities are very, very far, like the community we're working with on this project. They've got computer centers, they've got a very good community network that is working, that is functional. But that's because the NIDSA, Nigerian Information Development Agency, paid for this, and after a while, they only pay for a certain amount of time, and after a while, these things go away. But when these resources are deployed from the institutions, then they are sure of having these things running. And the remedial sciences will target those students in these remote areas who have left high school, but have not yet gotten admission into the university. So they can run these remedial studies online for a year to prepare them to get admission into any science course later on in any of these institutions that are partnering with them. And once they are running these remedial studies, they have access to the library services too in any of these institutions. And they can get they can get books from these libraries by just going online, checking that the books are available. And the idea is to have these books transported to the local government offices in these communities, and then they can go and collect the books, or they can have access to it online if it's an online resource. If it's a physical book they want, then they can take it down to the local government office and they can get the book. And another service that will be deployed on this network is having lectures online. Like I said earlier, you can have a lecturer who is very good in a particular course, and he's now able to teach these children better and put them through. So you have one institution coming together to work. You have one lecturer attending to different institutions and providing services to these children at the same time. And so we have the interactive mathematics for children and for girls that will teach them cooking and at the same time also teach them mathematics. So we had a proof of concept. We ran a proof of concept. We had the ICTP. The ICTP was gracious enough to provide us the cloud infrastructure. So, and then two universities participated, the Plateau State University and the University of Jos participated, where we ran 2 different courses so the students from these 2 universities were able to attend the same course taught by the same lecturer, either in computer science or mass comm, depending on which one has the better lecturer and has the better facilities. We used Moodle as the learning management system, and we also had the customized application that was able to teach the girls how to do some fractions in mathematics using the normal recipe. We had, from our POC, we had some findings, and the findings showed that the female students actually participated better than the male students. And so we saw that, okay, actually technology improves on this. It helps the girl child better. And we saw that the online interaction was more engaging because the teacher too was not always there, but can also check in what the students wrote or what information they wanted clarification on, and he will give them answers. So there was like sort of an almost 24-hour presence of your teacher there, or you could just check in later and get the results, more like waiting for another class to come in before you can ask your questions. And we found out that these students were able to discuss and interact before and after the class. And these things happened during COVID, and we saw that sometimes you didn't have that physical interaction, but because they had this online thing, they could do it. This is a screenshot from one of the classes we had. And one of the things we saw that even people who were sick were able to still attend classes. Like this girl here, she was sick, but she was able to attend classes. So we saw how it has improved attendance for students too. And there were also some interaction. You see the lady at the bottom still had, she could manage her shop and still attend lectures again at the same time. So she wasn't divided in her engagements like that. So this is the recipe where you can see you have 60 minutes, you soak rice for half an hour. How many more minutes do you have? Like, it's an interactive application. The video is there if anybody, later on I can share it with anybody who wants to see it. So this next screenshots too are from the video of the interactive application. There were some challenges, of course, while doing this, while trying to work on the proof of concept. We saw that one of the challenges we might have in doing this thing, in fully deploying it, will be funds. ICTP had to provide all the funds for us to run this proof of concept, which we're happy they did. But after it, how do we sustain this thing? Then the unreliable power supply problems that we always have. Just this week, the national grid has gone down, and we know that there's always need for power supply for internet facilities and online applications. The human resources might not be there because in the core, in the remote areas, most of them are running back to the urban areas. So how do we keep local technical people remain in the villages and still have this on? And there were some solutions for the problems we identified. And in conclusion, we said that using ICT facilities would definitely improve education and the social economic development of the host community also. And the female child can still go to school, even in the core northern Nigeria, where there are challenges of the female child going to school. And there's a saying that says, train a woman, train a nation. So if you can get education to the female child, then you're sure of a better nation and a better world. And it will help Nigeria to meet its SDG goals too. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. Does anyone have questions for Mary Jane?
Marwan.
Hi, Mary Jane. Thank you. Just a quick one, because I had to look away for a moment. The communication, is it just basically institution to the participant or the student, or is there connectivity with the outside world as well? So is it a closed network, or is, can people reach stuff out in the world?
Yes, they can reach stuff out in the world. And also the idea is that there'll be, for a particular time, you can't say that researchers won't be working 24/7, but the idea also is that for a particular time, there will be free access to the internet for these communities too, when the universities are not really using it for a major project. But there's communication to the outside world too. It might be regulated because for the communities, there might be some time that it will just be within, you just have access to just within the network. And then maybe in the evenings, you allow it, you open it up for them, or you give them an access, but it's opened also to the world. Communication is also open to the outside world.
Got it, thank you.
Very much, Marwan. Anyone else with questions for Mary Jane? Who's coming in? Where are you, Mary Jane? Are you in Trieste or are you in Nigeria?
Right now I'm in Trieste. Excellent.
And if folks didn't hear the first part of this, Mary Jane's working with a good colleague of many of ours, Marco Zanaro, and I assume Ermano Pietrosmoli too, from the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy. They're a great team of experts, and we've used them in the field to do some radio frequency training. And I believe Ermano has the world record on a point-to-point connectivity from Italy to another island. But anyway, side note. All right, Mary Jane, thank you so much. I don't see anyone else. Leandro, anything from your side?
Sorry, I had some technical problems to join. Do you hear me?
Yes. Yes, you can. Yes, I can.
Thank you. My question would be, to what extent do you think your experience can replicate elsewhere? How would you, what advice you would share with the participants to apply similar things to other regions?
Yeah, the good thing is that this can be replicated anywhere. Even the girl-child issue is not just in Nigeria; it's everywhere. But they all have the same kind of foundation, cultural foundation. So if you are replicating this, like for the apps, you just replicate it in such a way that it will reflect the cultural norms of that area. But and then for the internet and for the network connection, it's almost certain that it's the same thing everywhere. It's universal everywhere, sort of. The communications, building a community cloud is the same way you can build it anywhere in the world. So when it comes to the applications or the services, you just build it around the cultural norms of that area. And basically, the thing is, you don't tell somebody that your culture, the things in your culture are bad. You just tell them that, okay, I can use your culture to get something that good out of it, and it can be replicated anywhere, actually.
Colin's in the queue as well. Colin.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Interesting talk. This is clearly important work that you're doing. I'm wondering if there are lessons we should be learning for the way we build protocols. From the differences in the environment where you're building these sorts of systems compared to the environment in perhaps North America and Europe, where a lot of the people designing the protocols sort of live and work. And if there's requirements or problems with the way the protocols and the infrastructure have been designed, which we should be thinking about in the IETF and IETF communities to help out making the protocols more widely useful.
Okay. Can I move to this slide, which I just quickly rushed over just to give an answer to your question. The thing with the infrastructure is that I will say yes. We have to consider some designs of the infrastructure when we're considering developing countries where power is an issue. You build low power infrastructure that can serve them for as long as possible. I mean, it's not really, there's a limit to how much the devices can run, but if you can have low power equipment, it will help a lot, because some of the equipment gets spoiled because of the on and off, like of power going on and off, on and off. In the power situation is really bad. It might not be very obvious for people in developed countries, but it's very bad. In my parents' house back home, we still have like 3 sources of power, but there are still some times that you might go without power at all. So considering design infrastructure is very good. Considering protocols too will be very good for us to okay, look at the TV white space technology now. We have still not done anything in Nigeria with it, because they are still working on the policy. I mean, for how long, And so yes, there are some things we need to consider when the IETF needs to consider some things as it relates to developed countries, and a different way to consider it as it relates to developing countries.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, I mean, the policy considerations are perhaps not something the IETF can, has much useful experience in, but building protocols for less robust infrastructure is certainly something we should think about. Thank you.
We need to connect you, and thank you for that, Colin, because that's a problem we're seeing so in many places around the planet. And Mary Jane, we should connect you with the APC team, the Association for Progressive Communications, who are working right now with the government in Nigeria. So this is where technology and policy start to interface to try and get more infrastructure deployed and get those rules and regs out there for the spectrum. And we are at time here for this one. Thank you so much, Mary Jane. This was really great to have you able to present. And we are just note for everyone that the presentation is in the data tracker. All right. So thank you so much. And good luck to you with the work you're doing with ICTP. It's awesome. So next up is Marwan Fayed from Cloudflare. Marwan, over to you. And I think I have to give you permission. Nope. Give it a go with your slides.
Okay, do I share screen or share slides, I guess?
Yep. And hang on, I've just given you permission. Go.
I'll try again. There we go. And share. All right. Thank you for having me, Jane, Leandro. So I'm at Cloudflare on the research team here in a personal capacity. Just to give you a little bit about background and where I'm coming from here. Formerly a university professor, computer science, networking was my domain. As part of that, about 10 years ago, my goodness, almost exactly 10 years ago now, I worked with a few other colleagues, other professors and a network engineer, and we co-founded a community broadband ISP, but of a different order. And this emerged just after Wi-Fi started to emerge, which will be familiar to many. So what we found was, with just a little bit of training and a little bit of support, communities are fairly adept at deploying their own infrastructure, wireless antennas, if they're so fortunate, maybe fiber in a few places, basic IP connectivity. The real problem was that internet services, access to the wider internet, if it could be found at all, was prohibitively expensive for any community. So what we did with this ISP was we launched it as a cooperative for backhaul specifically. So the subscribers of this ISP were community networks, and as a consequence of being a cooperative, the community networks were also the members. So they would help decide the fate of the ISP, any additional revenue. They had a hand in deciding how it was spent, far more often than not, which was back into the service, which is a good thing. And as a result, people who were 200 miles, 300 kilometers away from the nearest exchange or more, often no roads in or out some of these places, they were getting better and faster internet than people in the middle of Glasgow and Edinburgh at the time. So this is where I'm coming from in terms of background. I've been with Cloudflare Research, as I said, for a little while now, and this week they launched a product. And I promised Jane there'd be no marketing involved in this one, but I think it's important to understand the context here. After launching that product on Monday, and I'm happy to talk about it offline if anybody's interested, in preparing these slides, it really started me thinking about what would be the next thing. So this is very much about the CDN space in community networks and maybe the role that CDNs can play. Okay. So let's begin. As I said before, internet services are largely inaccessible to community networks. And this is really bizarre because going through these one by one, the bullets, communities are fully adept at designing and deploying their own local infrastructure, as I said. And it might be difficult. By no means am I saying that it's easy, but crucially here is that many, if not all aspects of this are well within the community's control or influence. So they have a strong hand in the fate and direction of the outcome. In the next case, there's this notion of backhaul to an exchange or an internet connection point. Okay? and I'm gonna touch on this in a moment in the next slide, but I want to distinguish between the notion of carrying packets long distance and moving those packets on and off the internet on behalf of the community network. So the backhaul I'm going to use in this context is just taking packets long distance. So even the backhaul community networks have a good hand in deciding. These can be self-owned, highly unlikely, I acknowledge. They can be via some sort of a university or educational network. We saw little bits of this in the previous talk. Thank you. Or even the publicly funded national networks. So there are ways forward. And again, I'll touch on this again. There's this last one though, which is the internet services themselves. So people have various names for this, but it is effectively when the community networks packets are routed to the internet and the responses are routed out of the internet back into the community network, okay? I want to point out here, this is most often purchased with backhaul service. Usually it's the telcos, not the educational networks, for example. So you find a local cabinet, you pay a small fortune, if you can afford it, to carry packets to the internet exchange. And since it's also the same company that's provided you with the backhaul, it's usually cheaper to buy them together as a bundle, okay? But I want to emphasize here, it is not a requirement. So it is possible to buy the backhaul completely independently of that service to and from the internet. So here's a couple of examples. I wish I could take credit for the beauty of these figures. The designs maybe, but the figures themselves are owed to Carrie Linder. So the first is this notion of co-location. These models will be very familiar to most in the room, which is the idea that you have your community network in this big sort of rounded quadrilateral here, and there's an internet exchange facility where you put a router as the community network, and the internet service has another router in the same facility. There's a cable between them, and then you get your onward service. Look, most community networks will never be so fortunate to be in this position. There are a few that tend to be in urban environments, NYC mesh among them. Okay. The second is going to be the one that is most familiar to people. So you have a community network on the left. Typically, there's a cabinet or some connection point that is at least reachable. Community network sticks its box in there, connects to the backhaul provider's box, and then the backhaul, which is the red component here, will take those packets onward and may or may not provide those internet services at the exchange. Okay. There's this third model, which I think is increasing in popularity. And in the last couple of months, I've realized there's more of these out there than I understood previously, which is grand. And it's this idea that the backhaul service and the internet service in particular is so expensive beyond any community network's budget. So the nearby community networks, even they might be 100 or 200 kilometers from each other. Jane pointed out the longest distance wireless link across an ocean. Today on the west coast of Scotland, right now there's a run that's 25 miles or 40 kilometers, and it runs, I think, at about 100 megabits per second. With just straight ordinary Wi-Fi. So you get a bunch of communities together that might connect to each other for resilience, but crucially, they all connect to some point at one end of a backhaul service. Now the communities in their entirety can afford to carry those packets reasonably to the internet exchange, maybe even provide their own internet service, as some do. Wi-Fi does in Spain, and Hubs does in Italy, okay? So the question then is, if they can control their own fate within their community, and they have a say in how the packets go from the long distance from wherever they happen to be to the exchange point, then what about this internet service here? Okay, how do we solve that problem? And I want to just come back to this earlier slide and point out these two first elements, clearly the first things that have to be attacked, I call them community-driven elements, okay? But this last one, and this is the one that really hurts, because no ifs, ands, or buts, there is no community that gets to decide the pricing of the internet services that it receives. So what are we going to do here? Here's what I would like to ask and kind of spark conversation. and point out that CDNs, they are not internet service providers, not by any stretch of the imagination, but they are very well connected networks. And in fact, some CDNs are more connected than any tier 1 ISP that we can imagine. Okay. This is really, really interesting. By the way, when I say well connected here, I want to point out this is well connected relative to their own scale. Okay, so yes, you have your Mammoth International CDNs, your Cloudflares, your Akamais, and your Fastly's, but there are also smaller regional or national type CDNs that people create all on their own. So relative to their operating environment, CDNs are very often well connected. And so the question then that falls out of this observation is, what might CDNs and other non-ISP entities do to contribute to the community network's connectivity? Okay. And crucially here, and this one's really, really important, this little bottom caveat is also we have to consider the reasons. I'm not going to say that they might want to do so. I claim that they should want to do so. So let's look at CDNs and these non-ISPs and the facilities and the features that they offer, right? In order to operate internally, they route data around within the infrastructure. And they probably run additional services on top of that related to things like content delivery and caching or security or both and more. Okay, so they run familiar type things internally. They're well equipped. Externally, well, they have to be able to interface with the rest of the internet, and so they have reliable, high quality connections, okay, to the wider internet. And they have addresses that they can announce via BGP, just like everybody else does. And one thing, something that applies equally irrespective of size is that the differences are associated with scale alone. Okay, so yes, it's true that a regional ISP will have a smaller pipe to the outside world than a Mammoth global CDN. Sorry, it's CDN, not ISP. But for their size of service, they will generally have good connections and good infrastructure. So that's fine. I mean, from a technical perspective, CDNs have many of the elements that you would need from an ISP-like entity, okay? And then one has to ask, well, look, CDNs aren't transit providers by any stretch. They have some content and they send it out to the world when it's requested. So what are the incentives for them to do just a couple of things differently, okay? And here's the interesting thing is, I actually firmly believe that the incentives here to engage with community networks, offer connectivity or services to community networks, it aligns much more tightly with CDNs than it ever will with ISPs, okay? Personal claim. So let's consider this. Think about the additional bandwidth and service costs. So if there's a CDN that offers connectivity to a community network, clearly that's going to increase the bytes in flight, okay? It's going to increase the P95 value. But here's the thing. If you're a large CDN, your traffic is probably so vast and so large that any community network or even a whole bunch of community networks are really not going to be felt. They're really not going to change anything substantially. It might even cost more to bill and to take care of these kinds of tasks than it would be to just allow an extra gigabit or two when you're already running 10, 20, 40, and 100. And if you're a small CDN where you might notice this, I'm going to point out that more traffic puts you in a better position to negotiate for bigger connections, okay? So sharing your connectivity with a community network downstream might actually help you to reduce your costs if you're a smaller CDN. That's great. Now here's the big incentive, as far as I'm concerned. If there are more connections, remember, you're a CDN, you don't know how to originate content. You have customers that originate content. You need to make them happy. Whether that's a government or a commercial, doesn't matter. If there are more connections and more users who are connected, then there's a larger audience, and that means happier customers. And it means happier customers in a number of ways, right? Might actually, not only is there a larger audience for those customers to reach, so imagine you're a retailer, okay, then there's more potential shoppers. But you might actually reduce your customer costs. And think about this, if you're running customers that have to run services that predate internet, for example, and government services are classic ones. Maybe even grocery stores that want to move to a delivery model. Pre-internet, you have to handle paper and phone calls. And you want desperately to move your services onto the internet, meaning less paper and fewer phone calls, and overall that's going to reduce your costs. So not only might you reduce your own costs via bandwidth, not only will you make your customers happier, but you might actually reduce your customers' costs of delivering service. Okay. What about charging models? Well, come back to this first bullet. If you're a large ISP, you probably don't feel it. And if you're a smaller ISP, you engage in a cost sharing model. Okay. And so the trick here is that you should never charge as a CDN any more than cost, because there are all these other benefits alongside. So how about models of service delivery? So there's this question that repeatedly comes up again and again. Should we consider protocols? Should the IETF be involved? What are the roles for different parties to play? That first question, should the IETF or similar decide somehow interfaces or best practices with respect to these community network to CDN connections when they appear? I have no answer. It's hard to know. Ideally, CDNs use some sort of open standard to do this so that people can move around, not in addition for interoperability, but you can imagine some CDNs might want to retain, some competitive advantage, or at least feel as if they are. But coupled with that, it's also unclear how to extend CDN specific services in isolation. So a CDN will have built up all of this infrastructure and all of this software in order to deliver its own service. And so if it's going to open up its network a little bit to a community network, there's a desire to somehow provide some of that in isolation from everything else. And it's not at all clear how to do that, or if it gets in the way of what might otherwise be open standards. What about commercial interests? I'm going to come back to that previous slide. Happier customers, okay? And this last one kind of came up while I was thinking about this, generating the slides this week, is could community cooperative models that we know work well in the communities, that we now see work well for backhaul and onward internet services, could a community cooperative model also extend to this space, the CDN space, both for content and for community network connectivity? It's an open question. I can put it to the audience. I doubt we're going to come up with any answers today. Okay, but I will say, as a sort of evidence point of possibility, there's an intern that I work with. He started, he was a student, and he's a young student pre-university, and he started a 40-pop Anycast CDN out of his bedroom during COVID because he wanted to learn more about networking, and he figured this was a good way to do it. And it's a full stack service, right from ECMP load balancing at the bottom end to HTTPS service and certificate management at the top end. He has running on his CDN FOSS-Host, which is a non-profit CDN for open source software. So they host things like the Debian and GNOME, okay? And it strikes me that is, if he can do it, then there might actually be an opportunity here for community networks and for cooperatives. And this is where I leave the room. So just to summarize, CDNs are very well connected. The incentives I claim for CDNs to provide connections and services to community networks has greater alignment than it does with ISPs, and probably ever will. I claim there's no more than cost charging models are appropriate here. And then I'm going to leave you with this question is, in part, does the IETF get involved? But even more fundamentally, maybe this is the next big step for community cooperatives. Thanks.
Marwan, do we have questions for Marwan? I know there's some good chat going on. Much appreciated. Jared, over to you.
So I'm going to say we should probably talk offline about this.
When you said hello, I did think that, Jared. Yes, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who don't understand that the dynamics of how the interconnection practices work, the relationships, how much of the personality of the people involved matters, as well as the technical value and the business value. And there's a lot of dynamics at play when you get from every step from, moving the grain of sand in the dirt all the way to how you interconnect and where you interconnect and at what speeds. I know in building my small hobby ISP, one of the biggest challenges I had was finding that backhaul capacity. And I could get it, but I could get it a mile east or a mile west of where I wanted to be. And the additional cost to build that was, somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 to get that extra mile. And that poses a unique challenge. I think there's going to be a lot of challenges in trying to convince a CDN such as, for example, Akamai or Cloudflare or Netflix or somebody who has this content to pay for the last mile networks. That's what a lot of the ISPs have wanted, have kind of said, well, you're using our lines, you should pay us. The economics dynamics at play of how you do that are very broad and a huge challenge. And I mean, 85% of the cost, at least for me, in my hobby ISP, is the contract labor to get the mainline construction completed. And so once you're to a connection point, the bandwidth costs become infinitesimal and rapidly decrease with scale. But getting to that connection point is, I think, the big challenge. And how and who and how should close that gap is an incredibly complex dynamic of public policy in the geolocation where that access is, and I'm not sure where that intersection is, where with the standard setting organizations or the research organizations are, because a lot of that seems to be outside of that wheelhouse. So that's sort of my commentary on it. But I do think that there is some interest or value in the CDNs, but we found the CDNs. So switching hats to more of my day job CDN hat, like we build deeper into these networks because we have to in order to get the content to the end users. And we kind of chase the end users to some extent to those regional aggregation points. And so, yeah, we should be building more of those. And they should be in more neutral locations. But when you get to even a large market like Detroit, you don't even have the two major players interconnected in the same locations, like the two major incumbents, let alone anything else. And so just those dynamics that are at play are really hard, and things get very diffuse very fast outside of the large regional aggregation points.
So I will say a couple of things, if I may. First is, remember, there are many differences throughout the world. So what we see in the US, we can often see different things elsewhere. But you point out some really, really good ones. You'll find policies in a lot of places are bizarrely designed, and I can personal opinion as to why that might be. So for example, the cost of lighting fiber is based on distance in most places I know, which makes very little sense to me, considering that once something is in the ground, and I'll acknowledge that initial cost, the cost to light a fiber over a kilometer, like 100 meters or 1,000 meters, is the same. And why they should be priced differently is I've never understood, and that is a policy thing. As far as actually getting the connectivity, yeah, when you're laying fiber, there are some serious complications. If you rely on the large telcos to do it, it's never going to be cheap. In my experience, what happens is the community co-ops will put up wireless connections and then use the revenues from that over time in order to lay their own fiber. And typically the places where you're laying fiber are places, landowners who already have little tractors and things, but you can rent them and do it at a fraction of the cost of what you're suggesting. I'm not saying it's that easy. I know there's all kinds of policy, land ownership, and other issues, but I think it's doable.
I welcome you to come out here, and I'll show you the challenges. I think.
Oh yeah, no. I believe you where whatever you say is true where you are. I 100% believe you, no question.
Yeah, I'd be happy for you or anyone else here to come by and lend even an hour's worth of labor to understand just how slow it can actually be in getting some of this stuff done. It's
preaching to the choir. It's a good room. But I will say, sorry.
Hey, I just want to make sure we caught up with anyone else who wanted to be in the queue, and just a recognition that there are a lot of different embedded regulatory and policy schemes that, and Jared, there's also just a lot of what goes on in the municipalities of different entities having a lock on those municipalities, or even where I am now on the buildings, which is ridiculous, right? But anyway, that's the way it goes. Sorry to interrupt you, Marwan. Is there anyone else?
No. And then just lastly is that should be no barrier to, I think you're right. I mean, the sort of regional expansion. So coming from Cloudflare, for those in the room, Cloudflare this week announced that it was going to provide internet services. So from the internet and denial of service protection and all the good stuff for free to community networks, wherever it has a connection point, wherever it has a POP. Almost wherever. So, and as Cloudflare grows, then those opportunities to connect grow. For me, as I'm generating these slides, I'm thinking Netflix, for example, or Akamai with its little boxes that it puts in other people's networks. There's no reason that if you couldn't get the ISP to agree at least to route to those boxes, you couldn't get similar types of service. So by no means am I suggesting that all the answers are here, but I think it's a space that's worth exploring and talking about. Jeffrey.
Kind of proposing a re-architecture of the way the internet works. Right now, there's kind of the backbone providers who have a funding model that I've never really understood, and you're saying that it makes sense to replace them with CDNs whose funding model is to charge the content provider and use community networks to get kind of the last mile. And some sort of data transfer between the big CDNs so that you can kind of cross those worlds. But it's a replacement.
If the big CDNs want to peer with each other and talk to each other in a way that accomplishes that, who am I to say what's right and wrong, right?
I mean, they have to in order to do what you're proposing. Like, if they provide that backbone service, then the traffic has to be able to escape the CDN. And so if this happens, like, you've replaced the architecture. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's an interesting implication.
On a personal level, I might say I'm eternally grateful for everything ISPs have given us, the traditional ISPs. But it's also been 20 years that we've been trying to solve this problem, and universally ISPs are seeing, I would love for them to be bigger partners than they are perceived to be. Let's put it that way.
Is there anyone else in the queue? We've got a couple minutes before we jump over to Ray. And I note the chat, Marwan, there's a great chat going back and forth.
Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry.
No, it's a part of the function of how you have it set up on your screen, and I'm learning how to make the setup better. Okay. Well, note that Marwan's presentation is up on Data Tracker, and you know where to find him. Thank you so much. This is fabulous. And a food for thought about the architectural changes. Okay, so next up is Ray Pelletier. Over to you, Ray.
Can you hear me now? Hello, Jane. I can't hear you.
You can't hear me, no?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, there's a bar at the in the lower right-hand corner. You can increase the audio.
But just in case, I hear you perfectly.
I can hear both of you just fine, so you know.
And you should be able to show your slides. There you go. Voila.
Good. Well, hello, everyone. Pleased to be here, and thanks to Jane and Leandro for all their work over all these years. And shout out to my friends Emideco, Lorenzo, and Alessandro. So I'm going to talk about the netrification of Vermont through the communication union districts. This is not a talk about technology, and this is not a talk about farmers using ditch-witches to bury fiber or to string, or neighbors stringing fiber from pole to pole. This is a discussion about how the state of Vermont has enabled, empowered local jurisdictions to actually do band deployment, and how fortunate we are to have that public policy in place, as well as the funding that's coming our way. So we are not struggling like many of the folks that I've admired over the years who are working around the world installing networks, do-it-yourself networks. So who we are, what we're doing, and how we're going to pay for it. So let's talk about this. So Vermont is about 9,000 square miles. It's about the size of Turkey. It's got 14,000 road miles and 650,000 people, which is about the population of Luxembourg. We have 50,000 addresses that are underserved according to the federal guidelines of being 25.3, but we have 250,000 with less than 100, which are going to be service. And we're considered among the top 5 worst connected states. So how did we get started in this? How did the Vermont approach get developed? Well, in the typical way, and that is we had a group of citizens in the east central part of Vermont who did not have internet connection, who wanted to have internet connection, and who raised money privately to their network. And they were called EC Fiber, your basic do-it-yourself community network. But they ran into a roadblock at a point where they ran out of the funding that they got from private sources, and they needed to raise money through selling of bonds. But they were not a municipality. They were just a group of that had signed local agreements among themselves with regard to delivering broadband in the area. And so they were looking for the recognition of the status of being a municipality so they could go to the municipal bond market. And as a result of this, they went to the legislature, and at that point in time, Vermont in 2015 passed this legislation that enabled the creation of what they call communication union districts, which enabled towns to form the CUD. And these CUDs are a nonprofit, single purpose, and the goal is to deliver symmetrical 100 megabits per second to all of the underserved in Vermont. That's the goal. This year, in 2021, they've set up a band board whose purpose is to facilitate and support the CUDs in their efforts. And they also set up this Vermont Community Broadband Fund, into which is being poured all the grant money that's coming from the federal government as well as state money. So in Vermont, there are 9 CUDs, and CV Fiber, of which I am a member, a board-appointed member from the town of Northfield, is made up of 20 communities in central Vermont. And it's going to do fiber, fiber, fiber. We're not setting up any wireless towers or anything. These are the communities of Vermont that are part of CV Fiber. But what's more interesting, if you can see it, is the topography of Vermont. Vermont is mountainous, it's hilly, there are valleys. And so there's a challenge of getting fiber, even wireless, into the communities. So our mission is to deliver affordable, reliable internet service to the underserved. Our first priority is the underserved, And the goals of CV Fiber are to make that service available to half of the underserved in our 20-member community by 80% by the following year and 95% by the year after that. And notice the little asterisks in the bottom there, subject to fund, material, and contractor availability, which is going to be the challenge. In our district, there's 26,000 premises. The construction costs are going to be $50 to $60 million. And we have to string something like 1,200 miles of fiber. And of course, right now, those are road miles, but the actual network miles will be more than that. So this is the process of building the network, something I'm sure you're all familiar with. I have to do pole inventory. So I have 3 contractors standing by waiting for a notice to proceed while we wait for grant funds to come in, and so they can launch their pole inventories. But we're going to be taking information about each pole in our communities, and there's some 25,000 poles within this communication union district. And we're collecting about 50 bits of data, including the height, what the attachments are, how old is it, whether it needs to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first part of then going into network design, high-level design and detail engineering, and then make ready, of course, you're probably familiar with, and that is just moving things on the pole so we 12-inch space where the fiber is going to go. A very expensive proposition, by the way. And then we get to the construction part of actually stringing the fiber up there. And then the last part is the service, the connection bit. So here's the breakdown. Having broken down the pre-construction, construction, operations bit, here is the cost we're expecting for the work over the years. Pole data, about $800,000. You can see the make-ready work, $6.5 million, construction, et cetera, connections, bringing us to $46 million. We've broken the community down into these 4 different areas. Areas A, B, C, and D. We've been told that we should expect to construct about 300 miles per year. And so that we're looking at doing areas A and B, consisting of 5 and 7 communities in the first year, and then area C the third year, and the second year, and then in area D we may not get to for a while because it's already well served by cable. Yeah, let's see what's next. So this is going to be a succession of images here about what we expect to do and when we expect to do it. We're expecting to do all of the pre-construction work in 2021, that is this year. So we see pole inventory, high-level design, and detailed engineering. Pole inventory, we have grants for Area A, some 200,000 plus to do that. We have about $390,000 or so to do all the high-level design and some of the detailed engineering. So we're going to need some more money for that. And we probably need another $500,000 or so to do pole inventories for B and C. Here's the construction phase 1. The difference here is that this is addressing the underserved. So you can see the phase 1 miles is different from the miles total. So the phase 1 miles for area A, for example, is 150 miles. And this is intended to address the needs of those underserved within those 5 towns. And you can see to do construction and service in 2022, and make ready for for B and C also in 2022. And you see area 3, which is 300 miles in 2023. Again, that's subject to fund, material, and contractor availability. And here it is spread out into phase 2, and phase 2 is the build out. We're actually going to be providing service to those who are served, but their speeds are about 25.3, or some of them have 100 over 100, but our basic service will be 100 over 100. So we'll be competing with existing service providers. Here's our cost estimates. And this is for the period of 2021 to 2025. And you can see that this year, less than 2 million, but 11 to 12 million dollars for the next 3 years, for a total of 43.5, 43.6 here. The Area D is not included within this model. So far, where are we going to get funds? Well, we've had about $1 million in grants so far for purposes of doing business studies, feasibility studies, and other work. We expect to get federal ARPA grant funds, about $20 million, and you're probably aware that the federal government American Rescue Plan Act has set aside broadband funds, and that the state of Vermont is getting us about $250 million of that, and we expect to get about 20 million of that. Towns themselves are also getting ARPA grant funds, and we're expecting to get about $5 million of contributions from them. There is currently a bill before Congress with regard to funds, which includes $65 billion for broadband, and we're expecting that when that bill passes, that we're going to see about $20 million. In addition, there are possibility of revenue bonds. The thing about revenue bonds is that you need 3 years of audited revenues being from subscription fees. And so we're looking at 2025 and beyond for the possibility of reaching the municipal market for revenue bonds. One of the things about these, there's one other possibility here, is that we've been working with an electric co-op, and these are designed to work to reach rural customers, people who don't have access to, weren't provided access to the regular power lines in the beginning, and as part of the electrification in the United States, all of these rural co-ops were set up. Well, this Washington Electric co-op that we're working with has the possibility of obtaining 2.5% loans for the purpose of building out a network, and about 500 miles of their possible network might be in our district. And so we might have access to loans for 500 miles of work, probably about $12 million. So that's another possibility for us. Our goal is to provide affordable subscription rates, and as you're probably well aware that the cost of subscription rate is dependent upon the cost to build this thing. So we're expecting $50 million of that. The operations is yet to be determined what that's going to cost, and the other large cost is the cost of money. And so the more the lower the subscription rates are going to be. And to give you an example of the impact of that, EC Fiber, which I mentioned earlier as being the first one, is offering a $72 rate for 25/25 service, and debt service is about 50% of that rate. And so if they didn't have bonds, they has some $50 million of bonds outstanding. If they didn't have those kind of bonds, then their rate could be considerably lower. The other bit about CV Fiber and these CUDs is that we do not have access to taxes. So the only place we can get money is through subscription fees and grants. Hey, let's see here. And so this year we've been very busy, and you can see that we've done a lot of work, especially in the last few months, with issuing RFPs and launching inventories, signing contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a great deal of traction under what it is we're trying. And I have to acknowledge the fact that my years with IETF and all the experience that I had with RFPs and requests for bids and work orders, et cetera, et cetera. I've been writing a lot of those RFPs and contracts for CV Fiber. And that's it. Questions, comments, suggestions?
we've got a queue here. I think we have Rob up and then Jamie after Rob.
Ray, can you hear me?
I can.
This is an awesome project. I'm really glad to see that you're taking this on, because I suspect this is an awful lot of work for you. Besides, I mean, what you've just shown us here is substantial. You're planning to run most or all your fiber above ground, or above ground between towns, or how do you? I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Yeah, so we'll be stringing it from pole to pole. So we have 1,000 poles, and that's how it'll be distributed. Obviously, we'll be using conduits where we have to,
Sure.
but otherwise it's going on poles.
I'm just curious. I'm from Ohio, and I hope that your drivers are better than ours and don't knock too many of those poles down. The other thing that struck me was you're running fiber to everybody's house. I'd like to hope that before long we can force down the price of, fiber connected routers for home use. That seemed like a lot of homes and a lot of people who might have to do some, protocol conversion there.
Yeah, so I've been talking inside the finance committee anyway, and more generally to the board, of shooting for a goal of $50 for 100 over 100. Well, I think we can reach that, and perhaps we can do better than that. I'm also looking that we might be able to use grant funds for driving down the cost of installation, so that installation fees are non-existent for those homes that are within 400 to 600 feet of the pole. And for those that are longer, we're looking at providing customer assistance programs money, some grant money that we might be able to obtain. So to drive that down, and there's also will be an opportunity for reducing prices for those who can't find even $50 a month as being affordable for them.
Oh, I understand, Ray. This is great. Great job.
People may know that I'm semi-retired, that I'm doing a little teaching, but I'm between semesters right now, so I'm basically doing this full time. It's about 40 to 50 hours a week, and I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. This is when I find, oh, now there's an idea. We have to do something about that. You probably find yourself in those positions as well.
Ray, we have Jamie up in the queue now.
Hey, I was just curious whether you mentioned that that there are some competing service providers in part of the area. I was curious whether there's any opportunity to fold those into the community project.
So there's existing cable companies. There is let's see, Consolidated Communications is overlashing its own telephone lines, and they have about $400 million in investment that they're accelerating their delivery, and they can do it a lot faster than us because they don't have to do make ready. They don't have their expenses are far less, and their time needed is less. There will be a competitor. There are also folks who won RDOF funds from the federal government, for-profit companies that are going to be delivering service in census block areas, some within our district, with whom we may be competing. So we will see how that goes. And have we considered, and I will tell you that other places are considering, so that there has been line extension monies that have been made available to pick your favorite cable company to reach those last 5 homes, for example, that might be on that street to which they haven't gone because they can't get a return on their investment. Some of that money is being used in that fashion. And not the federal ARPA grant money, but other state monies has been used that way.
wondered, Ray, why a lot of the companies that exist already wouldn't just naturally partner with community networks and just give them free backhaul, because you'd be providing them cover on universal service coverage by providing coverage to the last mile, quote unquote, right?
Yeah, so when we had our potential partnership conversation with one of the providers, when I asked them to use their conduit or overlash their telephone lines, absolutely not.
Guess that infrastructure sharing regulation doesn't apply.
Not going to work.
It's surprising, but anyway, well, maybe not. All right, John, you're up. You're next in the queue. John
Thank
Levine.
you. Hi, Ray. It's been a while.
Hello, old friend. Good to see you.
Likewise. And I'm glad to see you're staying busy. I have sort of two unrelated questions. I was talking with George Sadowski actually a couple of weeks ago about EC Fiber, and I'm wondering how your experience compares to them, partly because they're pioneers and partly because their part of Vermont is a lot richer than yours.
Yeah, so I've been talking to George as well, and to the current chair of EC Fiber is also the chair of something called VCUDA, which is the Association of CUDs. And their experience is that they've had to go to the bond market and have all that heavy debt to pay off. They have an operator. We are currently RFP out for an operator, and it kind of appears that the tail is wagging the dog a little bit over there. They've been in existence for a long time, since 2011, so they got 10 years. They've been in existence. And it seems that their operator is kind of running things. Some observation and some insight from others.
Yeah, then the other thing, which is, I guess, more of an observation. My sister lives near Middlebury, and she has Dandy Fiber because she has an RLEC that is that is drinking deeply at the universal service trough. And in fact, I'm talking to you over Dandy 100 megabit fiber that it's everyone in my semi-rural part of upstate New York has, because we also have an RLEC. And I'm wondering, like, is there some way that the state could lean on the RLECs to be less obnoxious and partner with you? Because they have all this money, and it seems to me that running fiber on a pole is a natural monopoly, and it's silly to do it twice.
Yeah. Yeah, I have several thoughts. One is my view of the world, which people didn't want to take on, was that CV Fiber and all of these CUDs are municipalities. Mm-hmm. We have the right to acquire. We could acquire companies, for example, existing companies. But the other thing we could do is we can condemn and take easements. Nobody was interested in my idea of condemning the telephone lines and taking an easement, which would allow us to overlash their telephone lines. That wasn't very popular, but I would like to have done that. Would have saved a lot of time and money.
Okay.
I think I lost the thread on your question, though, or your comment.
No, basically, the comment was, Vermont has these RLECs, and they're all being rolled up. My sister's company got rolled up. My company just got rolled up to the same one that rolled up the Shoreham company to this. And they don't, these guys just want money. So anyway, I'm scratching my head. Is there some way that we can make it more in their interest to cooperate? But presumably, if there were, you would be doing it.
Yeah. One of the things about the fiber that we're stringing, this is all public property. It's public asset, right? Which is a good thing. And so we're not going to be bought out or rolled up for that. But what we might find ourselves doing over a period of the next 5-10 years, for example, is that we could want, instead of having 9 different operators running 9 different networks, we could find that there may be just 1, 2, or 3 operators that are operating these networks. But the contract is going to be that we own the public infrastructure, and they are under contract with us to operate the network. They have no financial investment in it, and a lot of companies are looking for even greater returns than what we're willing to provide them.
Okay. We should probably let him go on to the next talk. So good to see you.
Thank you very much, John and Ray. And one thing I would observe, Ray and John, for everyone here, that a lot of the places that different organizations are working in, and where Mary Jane comes from, and the person who couldn't be here today, Maragoro Jabera from Tanzania, the rules aren't necessarily as complicated from state to state as they, or from place to place in those places. So they're looking at actually creating new rules and regs that would open up the availability of municipal and community-led networks. So I think, Ray, you're up against a lot of entrenched legacy, not only mindset, but of course the regulations which impact the technology, which is a pain in the neck. All right, so Leandro, I'm going to turn it over to you to run the last half of the session. So thanks, everyone, and thank you to the speakers.
Thank you so much. I've really had a hard time to follow the discussion because I'm in moving houses and the connection is very unstable. So I'm a bit lost about what to do now, frankly.
I can help you. I'm in my office, so I'm not moving around. So the latter half of the agenda is us talking about where we go from here with Gaia. Is there anything you want to add to that, Leandro, with respect to what's up next in our thinking with our next session and or looking at RFCs, or over to you just for a little bit here?
Yeah, well, I would focus on commenting that there is an ongoing topic to focus on, which is that we all know technology has changed quite a lot in the last years, and then we have an RFC that reflects the state of the world more than like 5 years ago, and definitely by the time we finish a revision, things will have changed significantly, and not only in the technology part, but also in the business part, in the regulation part. I was wondering when I was hearing Ray, to what extent what is being done now could be done before COVID, for instance. Not only the perception of the importance of network connectivity, but also the implications of that in policy, technology, and everything. And this is something that we definitely have to do, and probably the way to start it is by sending an analysis of the RFC and calling for individual contributions to it. But I'm all ears to hear about comments about not only about upgrading the document, but also about expanding to new areas, or taking new topics also to include in that RFC.
Andrew's opening up the conversation to us updating the RFC that currently exists in the Gaia space. Now, Leandro, one thing I would throw out, and for everyone here, is the cost elements that we've been hearing about, and Jared on what labor costs are, Ray on studies from poll cost to, or poll analyses, and or environmental analyses that go into it, or from Mary Jane, just the cost of dealing with some of the challenges that she's got in front of her. I don't know if we had a robust cost analysis in that RFC. I've got to take a look again, but I like the idea of opening this back up to see if we can add sort of more sprints and agility to annexes to the RFC, potentially on new tech that's out there. We know a lot of new equipment, cheaper equipment's out there from Ubiquiti, Microtik, etc. And just different ways of building networks in all over the planet, which have shown us that there are different models that can be used. That might be something we could do. Does anyone have any comments to sort of the what Leandro and I are proposing about rebooting the RFC that's out there and different aspects that we could add to it. RFC number.
Yeah, this is RFC 7962. Yeah, from August 2016. Yeah, 5 years ago.
See anyone with anything to add to that? So I think, Leandro, that may be a go. So we could actually, Colin, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously, if you think things have changed and there's new experiences and new information to add to that RFC, it seems like it would be potentially worth thinking about an update or another document to discuss what's happened since then. Yeah, absolutely, seems a reasonable thing for the group to do.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
That's a good point, Colin. It could be a compendium, but I don't know how that works technically from the IRTF side, where it could be, can you have a compendium RFC to it? Of course you could, because you've got different iterations of the tech. Could you do that with the RFC as well?
I mean, the RFC itself can't change, but I mean, you could either publish a new RFC which updates it, or you could just publish a new RFC which says, you know, we previously published this document is talking about things that have you know, new experiences and so on. Yeah. And I mean, I think coming back to the first talk, I think it would be useful to make sure, you know, that anything we have reflects on the issues in developing parts of the world, and you know, it's easy for us to focus on, you know, the challenges in, you know, the rural parts of the US or rural parts of Scotland where Marwan did his work, for example. But, you know, there's obviously a lot of the rest of the world, and we should be making sure those things get reflected. I have to admit, I haven't read the RFC 79 and 62 or whatever it was for a very long time. So I forget what's in there.
Yeah, developing countries have electricity issues, getting equipment in. I mean, that's just a challenge in of itself sometimes with customs. But and the question you raised earlier about should the protocols, and John and others were going back and forth in the chat, do some of the protocols need to shift depending on different environmental concerns in a certain country?
Yeah,
maybe in aggregate.
Yeah, I suspect there are similar issues with. Yeah, I mean, probably some of the issues are similar with more rural infrastructure with renewables as well. So, you know, there's probably connections that can be drawn. It's worth understanding what are the issues.
Just about everyone we work with has generators, solar, other, or two generators. You know, the hot cut over. Those are for both internet exchange points and community networks. And actually, there's some really interesting IoT-related analyses that one community network we know in the Republic of Georgia is doing with respect to the solar panels, so that they can troubleshoot. Same in Greece. That could be some really interesting data for us to add.
I suspect you've got some very interesting data about running networks off renewable infrastructure as well, and you know, we don't do enough work on low carbon computing and low carbon networking. So, yeah, if you've got experiences there, that's certainly useful, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see Marwan is also in the queue.
So this is more generic. There's a number of things that are only obvious in hindsight that are often forgotten. Things like, what kind of cable do you put and how deep into the ground? Because mice and rabbit and deer and all kinds of creatures that one doesn't even know live in the region come out of the woodwork. And so you might spend a bundle on cable that you think is good enough, but turns out not to be. or dig it 3 inches into the ground when it should have been 12. These kinds of things.
Put something in the chat. We were actually about 200 kilometers above the Arctic Circle about 4 years ago, and okay, you know, we all know what permafrost is, but boy, was that something that we one of the local experts there said, "Yep, there's no way you're digging. You're putting it above on these funky like troughs, which were interesting along the road." But to your point, people don't think about that. And there's also fiber that some colleagues we know at Liquid Telecom in Sub-Saharan Africa have had to design so that it can withstand the pressure of large animals stepping in that area.
That's right.
I guess you wouldn't think you needed to design fiber for elephants, but you kind of do in some places. Or, you know, make sure you have the community's support not to try and dig up the fiber where they thought it was copper and that they could make money. So this is something that some of the big providers in Sub-Saharan have had to deal with, which is, you know, making sure that they talk to the local people about not digging up the network. I mean, it's also, it can be very different aspects of running a network that people hadn't thought of.
When you buy little cabinets to put your little mini MikroTik router or something inside of it, and it just because it says waterproof doesn't mean that it is. And when you make it waterproof, you know, on a hot day, so in many of the places that actually need it, these things will melt. So use that.
Yeah, that raises the question: to what extent producing a document that talks about the unconnected requires the unconnected to participate, and because otherwise it would reflect the views or the knowledge or the experiences of those who already are so well connected, and if it is just a matter of writing, or it requires some research and some involvement or questionnaires with those who are not yet connected or partially connected or that do not speak English and that do live in places where there are no markets, there are no operators that are operating at a certain scale, and this is like challenging. Otherwise, we would reflect our opinion about those who are not included in the discussion.
Well, I think we have our work cut out for us, Leandro, to get that started. So this is a good way forward, is to take another look. So I think for everyone, that could mean that you stay tuned for more data coming out of the Gaia team. We've been a little quiet this quarter, but we'll be back at you. Anything else from your side, Leandro, to add?
Not really. I think if we move forward on this, I think it's going to be a useful contribution. And also, as I said, I mean, it might raise also other contributions regarding, for instance, what was discussed before. I imagine like protocols optimized or designed considering that there are fragile networks and that maybe stateful protocols are not a good idea if connections drop continuously, or that, as someone said, that there is an interdependency between connectivity and power and other infrastructures, and this kind of extensive view of the interdependencies between the other infrastructures is also something to take into account. And that might of course become a separate document perhaps, but it's an opportunity to start thinking about new efforts to document experiences and plan for ideas for future protocol development.
Excellent. All right. Well, we have our marching orders, meaning things for us to do. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, and especially you, Leandro, too. I know you're moving houses. But thanks, everyone, for joining. Gaia provides an opportunity to hear from different people who are building and executing on networks rather than, and to test things in the wild. So we'll take all of the suggestions on board and the great chat that we've had here and some of the expertise from all of you who are actually out there building the networks and testing things in real time. and Ray, who's developing networks and designing them. Mary Jane, thank you very much. Ray, thank you very much, and Marwan. And we'll be back at you online. So thank you. We'll close a little early and give you back 15 minutes of your day.
Yeah, I congratulate everyone. Very motivating presentations and a lot of thought. And I thank you so much for being with us.
Take care.
So thank you. Take care. And thank you, Jane, for such an amazing moderation.
You betcha. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
And Alessandro, back over to you. What do I need to do to shut down so we can preserve the, is a video preserved no matter what?
Yep, I'll close the room for you, no problem.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, Meet Echo. You guys are great. All right. Grazie. I should say grazie.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.